Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our latest webinar, Pathways to Homeownership, a showcase of strategies to open doors. This webinar is the fourth in a series sponsored by NeighborWorks America, and we are thrilled to have Marietta Rodriguez, President and CEO of NeighborWorks America, joining me in just a few minutes to discuss the state of homeownership. As many of you know, June is National Homeownership Month. The National Housing Conference is celebrating all month long, starting with this webinar on opening doors for homeownership. We'll be in Atlanta on the observed Juneteenth holiday with the Black Homeownership Collaborative celebrating its one-year anniversary and discussing the role that Atlanta can play in actualizing homeownership opportunities for Black homebuyers. On June 29th, we'll be at the National Press Club for an event in partnership with Urban Institute, sponsored by Wells Fargo. Catalyst for Change, Reducing the Racial Homeownership Gap. We'll discuss national strategies for increasing homeownership for people of color. And of course, we are once again hosting our annual Housing Visionary Awards Gala at the Anthem on June 14th to celebrate visionary leaders in affordable housing and the work all of us have committed to the important work of affordable housing. Information about each of these events will be shared in the chat and is available on our website, nhc.org. This Homeownership Month, we are especially aware of the challenges that put pressure on the housing market and create barriers to homeownership. Rising interest rates, high material costs, supply chain issues, and stubbornly persistent actually, discrimination all contribute to the homeownership gap and significant barriers of entry for first-time and especially first-generation homebuyers. The panelists today will offer a survey of programs that are geared towards meeting these challenges and offering opportunities to underserved groups. Programs like these provide the expertise and real-world results that are needed to scale homeownership opportunities and make big differences in expanding homeownership to those who have been traditionally shut out. Thank you to the panelists for sharing your work with us. Our discussion today will be moderated by Kurt Nishimura, incoming president of the Asian Real Estate Association, ARIA. So please submit questions for the panelists through the Q&A function. We'll be taking audience questions after the presentations conclude. To get us started, I'm pleased to welcome my friend and colleague, Marietta Rodriguez, President and CEO of NeighborWorks America. Marietta has a proven record of leadership and accomplishment, creating and executing strategic initiatives that address some of the toughest challenges facing low-income families: homeownership, foreclosure prevention, community building, and engagement. And I would also note she has spent her entire professional life working on these issues and really is a model to her colleagues at NeighborWorks and all of us in affordable housing. So Marietta, welcome.
Thank you, David. Happy Homeownership Month.
Well, thank you. Same to you. And happy NeighborWorks Week.
I know, I'm very excited to be joining you today, and we're going to hear some great strategies that community-based organizations across the country are using to make sure that the pathway of homeownership remains open to those who most desire it. But David, I don't want to take anything for granted here. Why do we care about homeownership? Why is it important?
I think that's a great question. You know, homeownership is the principal way that most families build wealth, and it's passed on through generations, both in terms of the equity that is earned in housing that you own, but also in the experience of becoming a homeowner, of managing your home, and the equity that you've raised. And so I think it's really critically important for people. It gives people a real sense of ownership and agency over their lives and their economic situations. And it provides enormous stability for neighborhoods. has really a very well documented impact on the health of neighborhoods and contributions to our society in all kinds of ways.
No, that's absolutely right. It really reckons back to the NeighborWorks story of origin. For those of you that may not be familiar, NeighborWorks is a congressionally chartered public nonprofit guided by a statutory board. But we were created in the late 70s to enhance neighborhood stability when residents couldn't get access to home repair loans, and homeownership was being locked out for so many families because of redlining. And I think those issues we're still seeing today. And your points about the importance of homeownership is incredibly important. Let me ask you this. You may have a question for me, actually.
Well, I just want to, I'm interested in everybody understanding the role that your NeighborWorks organizations are playing on the ground in communities across the country. You know, I think that NeighborWorks is very unique in that way, that you have independent organizations around the country who engage in all kinds of different ways. And obviously they're the beneficiary of your support and experience, but vice versa is certainly true. So can you tell me a little bit about that and
Sure.
about what your best practices are that you're learning from?
Yeah,
your folks in the
I
field?
appreciate that question very much. When we were created in the late 70s, we were looking at replicating a model. We were tasked with replicating this model of residents, community leaders, business leaders, and government coming around the same table in a solutions-oriented way. And that became a template of nonprofits that we created across the country. Today, that network of nonprofits that we support is 247 organizations strong. They're independent, locally led organizations that we support through grant funding, capacity building, technical assistance, and training. NeighborWorks is also one of the largest trainers in the community development field for NeighborWorks organizations and others working in the industry. But some of the things that we provide, and we'll hear about some of the work that those NeighborWorks organizations are doing, but certainly providing access and capacity building at the local level. I think one of the great benefits is being part of this network of excellence. There's an opportunity for peer sharing. If a strategy is working in one community, we can take lessons and replicate those in other communities. So we pair sort of national expertise with local knowledge, and that really becomes the power of the network. We also tease out service delivery models, operational support, technical tools. We have more than 81 CDFIs in the network, and the NeighborWorks network plays an interesting role in the CDFI world in that the majority of our CDFIs use their CDFI designation for homeownership promotion. They do some microbusiness lending and economic development as well, but sort of supporting those CDFIs in their mortgage presence, both for subordinate and first mortgage origination is something we also support. We're really trying to move organizations to think about customer-centric strategies. I think nonprofits can sometimes get in an awkward place of reporting to funders or their government partners, and they need to think about how to attract and retain customers from a customer perspective. We also provide a fair amount of line of business disciplines and tools, like looking at the homeownership line of business through new lenses, like a sustainability ratio. How sustainable is this business line? Where are there gaps in that service delivery? I think one thing we don't hear about a lot on the nonprofit side is nonprofits grew up in a variety of ways. Some grew up because they were developers putting units on the ground. Some grew up because they grew out of the CAP agencies, the community action programs. Some grew up because becoming lenders or home repair lenders. And so I think those origin stories sort of center organizations, and it can really dictate how they approach some of these complex issues in the community. So we try to take the best of all of those origin stories to make them all stronger, frankly.
Well, and I think most people don't, we have over 300 people on the call, or nearly 300 people. And I think most people don't understand that not just anybody can be a NeighborWorks organization. You have to earn your way into the network and earn your seat every year. And that always impressed me, that this commitment to getting things done is so central to the NeighborWorks structure.
No, that's right. We have a great group of organizations, and we know there's many more working in communities every day out there. We're really grateful for the work they do in advancing the NeighborWorks mission.
So tell me a little bit about what NeighborWorks organizations are doing to recognize both National Homeownership Month and NeighborWorks Week.
Yeah, I mean, NeighborWorks Week, we're entering into the 39th year of celebrating NeighborWorks Week. It's really exciting, and it's really meant to elevate the local stories of impact, the success that organizations are having in communities, particularly as communities are becoming more resilient in bouncing back, hopefully stronger after the impact of the pandemic. So it's a very locally led celebration with stories and events, but it's held together by all of these celebratory events happening all across the country. So, for example, Wayfinders in Springfield, Massachusetts, who's obviously a NeighborWorks organization, their staff is presenting a virtual series on how to access down payment assistance programs that are available throughout the state, and information about fair housing as part of their NeighborWorks Week celebration. Lakota Funds, the first Native American CDFI and a recent member of the NeighborWorks network, is helping with a development project, helping 10 tenants of one of their properties enter into homeownership as part of that. It's timed right for NeighborWorks Week. So NeighborWorks Week celebrations come in all sorts of sizes, but we're all celebrating the great work that's happening at the local level. Let me ask you this, David. As I described, NeighborWorks was established during a time when focus on housing and community development and the birth of the Community Reinvestment Act was taking form. Can you talk a little bit, and there's a lot of conversation right now about CRA reform. Can you talk a little bit about how CRA has addressed the legacies of redlining, how important CRA is in advancing homeownership, and how do we pull that through into current day rulemaking?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And, the Community Reinvestment Act was made law in 1977, but what preceded it nearly 10 years earlier was the Fair Housing Act of 1968. And this made mortgage and housing discrimination illegal for the first time in our nation's history. It's hard to believe that many of us were alive when discrimination was perfectly legal. And what we saw was that wasn't clear how big an impact that was having. And so the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, most of us, in this industry use HMDA data quite a bit, was put together so that it would, in fact, give us an indication of how we're doing on combating racism. And the first set of HMDA data said not so good. And so the Banking Committee, particularly in the Senate, Senator Proxmire, really tried to figure out, okay, so how can we create some incentives for banks, a carrot and as well as a stick approach. And the CRA was born out of that to address redlining and economic disinvestment that was occurring throughout the country as jobs from the cities were funding investments of housing in the suburbs. And over the years, CRA has kind of grown and adapted, but really in the last 20 years, the banking industry has changed so much that we're actually well overdue for a modernization of CRA. The other thing we found is that homeownership rates for particularly Black Americans, but all people of color, and especially when you look at either Latino or Asian America or Pacific Islander populations by nationality, we have seen there's been a real gap that has grown in home ownership rates. And so the timing of this CRA modernization effort is actually quite important. And I think one of the things that's exciting is that this CRA rulemaking will directly address race, probably through the use of special purpose credit programs and enhanced tracking of performance by race. So we can really understand what we're doing and fully utilize this tool that was that came out of the ECOA Act and put that into action. So the Federal Reserve in their rulemaking, along with the OCC and the FDIC, have asked for guidance on how to do that. I think they've asked actually a lot of really good questions in what is a rulemaking that looks like it's probably got about support for 80% of it that just spans the entire spectrum. And now we've got to get to work and make sure that we're addressing the questions they have asked us and helping them ensure that they're getting it right, because it's incredibly complicated.
It is incredibly complicated, but also, as you mentioned, so incredibly important right now because of that growing gap in our home ownership rates. I couldn't agree with you more. There's so many challenges in communities that they're facing to keep those pathways of home ownership open. This is a really important tool.
It is, and I think that it's been encouraging to see how seriously this is being taken, both by the regulators and by all of us preparing our comments. We're meeting every week, and I know NeighborWorks and often you and others, as well as affiliate organizations, have been hard at work on this.
Yeah, no, it's really important. And when we think about the challenges that organizations are facing, the list, I feel like, just keeps getting stronger. Obviously, there's a lack of affordable, it keeps getting longer, lack of affordable inventory. We have a rising interest rate environment, increased competition with cash and investor buyers for first-time home buyers on the affordable side. And because we don't have a lot of affordable homes on the market, the developers, their cost to develop and create more inventory is much more difficult now with supply, as you indicated, supply chain issues, increased costs there, and diminishing or flat subsidy sources. So it's a really tough environment right now, and hopefully we'll start to see we'll hear about some strategies that are being used in communities.
Yeah, it really is. And, we have actually put together a very concerted effort to deal with this in the Black Home Ownership Collaborative. This started as a working group of NHC members. And what we found was that a lot of our stakeholders were also engaged in this effort. And to ensure that we really work together and leverage each other's initiatives, and also came together to do things that we could only really effectively do together. We moved that out of a working group and created a Black Homeownership Collaborative run by a steering committee of 8 of the key organizations in this space, including the mortgage bankers, the realtors, NAREB, the realtists, and the National Fair Housing Alliance, as well as the Urban Institute, and who's provided us incredible data, and the NAACP and National Urban League, and they play a very important role. And we're going to be launching a website next week geared towards the Black consumer to provide them the kind of information they need to really examine their readiness to understand the homeownership process and get some of that information that particularly first generation homebuyers just find a lot harder to get. So it's very encouraging. Let me ask you, when we talk about equitable and sustainable homeownership, what are some of the things that your organizations are learning and dealing with and putting into practice?
So much. I'm really glad you mentioned the Black Homeownership Collaborative, because I think that's a great model that I think a model and a lesson from the Great Foreclosure Crisis, in that we have to form cross-sector partnerships to address some of these inequities for the long term. And so stakeholders and service providers and industry leaders coming around the same table to strategize together, I think, is a critical piece that we're seeing. Obviously, there's no silver bullet that's going to solve a single strategy that's going to solve this effort. But I like to think about it in sort of three ways. There's things that we're supporting for community organizations, operational things, helping to make them more efficient, helping them have more customer-centric strategies, utilization of tech tools. We have a tool that we're putting in the market that's built on the Salesforce platform just to try to make organizations more efficient. So there's operational strategies. I also think there are community level strategies, these cross-sector partnerships, exploiting maybe the attention that the minority homeownership gap is receiving to bring philanthropy and other stakeholders to the table to help solution and bring more resources. And I think the third piece is, how can we galvanize industry? You mentioned the special purpose grant programs. I think those could have some legs. How can we pull together some new innovations? How can we leverage the lending capacity of CDFIs? So I think those are just a few things. I think the showcase that's going to follow us will spotlight a few of the innovative ways that the NeighborWorks network is creating and preserving homeownership opportunities. But I think we need to look at it with both sides. How do we get more people into homeownership, and how do we keep them there? It's not just about generating new home buyers. We can't lose them at the other end of the funnel because they're not sustainable. So making sure that there's sustainable products that we're financing these deals with is as important as getting more people into the pipeline.
I think that's exactly right. We've spent a lot of effort and learned a lot about counseling on the front end, but we also need to do a lot more post-purchase counseling and really pay more attention to the sustainability issue. We did a great job of helping people build wealth through housing before the mortgage crisis. Unfortunately, I think we really missed the opportunity to teach people wealth management, and they, as they built equity, really became ripe for people to take advantage of them and move them out of good loans and into bad loans. We saw an enormous amount of equity stripping of existing homeowners in the run-up to the crisis.
Yeah, I think that's right. And when individuals feel economic pressures, much like they're doing now, it does make them right. It's fertile ground for bad actors to strip away equity, and it's something we really need to work together again cross-sectorally to fortify those. We can sustain the gains.
Well, we could talk about this all day,
Indeed.
and we would be perfectly happy to do that. But it wouldn't be fair to our next panel, which is a pretty incredible group of leaders. And Kurt Nishimura from ARIA is going to lead that conversation. He's been a real estate consultant for over 10 years, focusing on acquiring, developing, and asset managing commercial real estate. He's a founder of the local area chapter in Greater Phoenix, served as his president in 2014, 15, and 2019. I know 2014 was a very interesting year in Phoenix, as well as the rest of the country, to be involved in this, and has served on the national board of ARIA as its national commercial chair in 2018 and 2019. I'm really looking forward to working with you, Kurt, as national president of ARIA next year, although we're not going to wait for that. So let me turn it over to you.
David, thank you so much for that very warm introduction. Very happy to represent ARIA. For those people that are not familiar with ARIA, ARIA is the Asian Real Estate Association of America. We are a nonprofit organization with the mission of helping the Asian American Pacific Islander community with sustainable home ownership. And the reason why this is such an important mission is despite the myth of the model myth, minority myth, there are several Asians that are not doing well or have not had the chance to enjoy home ownership. And Lawrence Yun of NAR, National Association of Realtors, he had a very important study that showed that people that about 5 years ago that were not homeowners only increased their wealth by about $5,000 on average. But for the people that were homeowners, their wealth increased by $250,000 on average. So home ownership is essential in basically shrinking the wealth gap that exists in America. So the work that everyone is doing on this panel is very, very important, and I appreciate everyone's effort. Some of the things that we do at ARIA is on an annual basis, we put out the State of Asia report. And that report is interesting just to kind of go over, some of the minorities within the Asian community that are struggling and where they're located at, and also why some of the Asians are moving and what parts of the country are they moving to. And also we had done a study as to what is making them move as well. Since over the last 2 years, we've seen a lot of Asian hate that has gone on. And this has been going on for a long time, but it's just because of social media that we've brought really a lens to it more recently. But certainly safety is a factor in the Asian buyers' mindset when they're picking a new community, along with kind of job opportunity. The other thing that we've done every year is have a policy summit that we go to Washington, D.C. And this year we had our largest number of people from across our leadership from our chapters across the country actually attend this to present a 3-point plan. And that 3-point plan includes, affordable housing, which is something that is affecting people of all races, all nationalities, all age groups. Also having equal access to down payment assistance program to make sure that's allocated on a fair basis. And finally, also changing how credit is actually scored and make changes to that to the positive. A lot of Asians, because of culturally or maybe religious reasons, or maybe the banking systems where they originally came from are weak, they don't really know how to establish credit, or they don't necessarily get credit for the timely payments that they're making for rent and utilities. And we want to see positive changes that it includes some of those other measures of credit worthiness and make appropriate changes so more people can actually apply and be able to own a home eventually. So ARIA is a great organization. If you'd like to learn more, I think we're going to share in the chat how you can actually get a copy of the 3-point plan. And then if you want a copy of the State of the Asia report, it would be areaa.org, and you can actually go online and get a copy of the State of Asia report, which is downloadable. It is my pleasure at this time to introduce one of our panelists. Her name is Jackie Butts of Some Clarity LLC, and she'll be our next presenter. And I'd like for her to introduce herself and kind of tell her own story and what her organization does. She can do that much better than myself. So go ahead, Jackie.
Okay, thank you. So again, my name is Jackie Butts. I'm the founder and manager of Some Clarity LLC. And my organization, just to give a little bit of background, I've been in homeownership and working for nonprofits. I've worked with the Portland Housing Center as their homeownership program director for about 6.5 years. And my experience is in lending. I'm still a licensed loan officer. I have my license in life and health insurance. I have banking experience, investment experience. So all of my work and experience has been financial services backed. And so after I'm going to talk about this course that I left the Portland Housing Center to work on simply helping to take this course nationwide and making it as widely available as possible. So let me tell you a little bit more about the course and then you'll understand. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to share with you today some of the information about the culturally specific financial education program for Black Americans, which is called Getting Your House in Order. Next slide, please. So before I talk about the course itself, it's important to give you just a little bit of the background of the origin story, so to speak. This course originated out of the Portland Housing Center that's located in Portland, Oregon. And if you don't know, Portland is known as one of the whitest big cities in America. So historically, redlining, predatory lending, racist housing policies has really hindered Black Americans and the Black community from attaining sustainable home ownership. So PHC was founded in 1991 to ensure that all Portland residents had equal access to information and resources to achieve this home ownership. Now, while PHC has been very successful in helping their clients to become homeowners, they were not making a dent in the Black community, which is one of the primary reasons why it was founded. So they need to figure out what the disconnect was. And they decided to do some research. And in that research, they talked to community leaders and partners, former Black clients, and community members. Next slide, please. And based upon that research, these were the 3 barriers that were identified as a barrier to home ownership. These are the main 3. There were others. It was family experiences. When your family when you don't grow up in a home that's owned by your family, it's less likely that you will become a homeowner. Also, financial challenges of the family. It was anticipated discrimination. We found that 2/3 of the folks we spoke to experienced some kind of discrimination with lending. So now there's also a lack of trust in financial institutions. And then just really the lack of knowledge, not really knowing how to maneuver your credit report, understanding how to increase your credit, having access to different credit information. So based upon these, the community as a whole lost a lot of opportunity to become homeowners. Next slide. So with those barriers identified and in mind, we worked with Rhea Combs, who worked and put together this course for us, Getting Your House in Order, and we introduced it in 2010. And Getting Your House in Order is created by Black Americans, taught by Black Americans for Black Americans. And when we look at the course, what we wanted to do was to really create a safe space for authentic interactions. We could talk about our experiences without having to justify, we could talk about our beliefs, and we didn't have to explain anything to us in the community. We relied on everyone's knowledge and experience in the class. It wasn't just the facilitator that was given the information. We firmly believe that everyone in the class has experience and knowledge that's important that can help everyone else. So the learning process is a group learning. And throughout the class, we did skill and confidence building in terms of how to do different exercises. Because the class created such an authentic space for discussion and expression, we found that we had to increase it from a 4-week course to a 5-week course. Next slide. And so the curriculum, I don't think that's the next slide. There's one, go back one more. Next. Okay. I'm not sure what happened there, but I've lost some of that. Okay, so the curriculum, that's fine. This is the curriculum that we designed as a way to address the barriers that are identified. And there are some key things that makes this course unique. One would be the letter to money, where we actually have the participants start a conversation with money as if it was a friend or a partner. And when you really think about it, money is one of those lifelong relationships that you have. So we really wanted our class participants to establish a strong relationship with money. We also had them do active participation, such as track their weekly spending, researching financial products, calculating their own debt to income ratios. And so the course itself became a very active and practical learning environment. Next client, thank you. And so what we wanted to happen was, once someone finished the course, we wanted to make sure that we had specific outcomes from the participants. We wanted to know, did they become financially resilient? Did they feel financially empowered? And did they go on to eventually become successful homeowners? And not just successful homeowners, but in a way that was affordable and sustainable. Next slide. So we have always gotten great feedback from our clients when they took the course, but we wanted to know for sure. We didn't want to rely on anecdotal information. We felt that we were getting the results we wanted, but we wanted to make sure, how can we prove it? When I joined PHC, we had gotten an opportunity to participate in Project Impact, and we used that to validate the course. So we did the Project Impact, next slide. And when we did the research, what we wanted to do was to focus on these three basic questions. Upon graduation, did our clients feel, did they have any positive changes in financial behavior? Did they have an increased level of confidence in managing their finances and interacting with financial institutions and professionals? And did they ultimately achieve a sense of being in control? Did they experience financial well-being? And not to get into too much detail, but our method was really to use in-depth interviews for qualitative data and email surveys for the quantitative data. Next slide. So in analyzing the data, these were the recurring themes that that the participants highlighted. And so I'm going to touch on some of the quantitative data that we've gotten. Next slide. So we compared the behavior of our clients 6 months prior to taking the course to their behavior after. And remember that the participants have either graduated from the course anywhere from 1 to 5 years. And so when we looked at their habit of budgeting, before taking the course, only 5% always budgeted. After the course, that went up to 32%. Before the course, 49% never budgeted, and that fell to 0% after taking the course. In maintaining an emergency fund, 7% always did it before, and that increased to 49% after. Importantly, 41% never maintained an emergency fund before the course, and that dropped to 2% after. Next slide. When we looked at contributing to savings or investments, before taking the course, only 3% always contributed to savings and investments, and that actually also included their retirement account at work. And then that increased to 34% after taking the class. 17% never contributed, and that dropped down to 3%. When we looked at their stress level, what is their relationship with money? Was there any change? Before taking the course, 61% had a high level of stress, and that decreased to 22% after. 15% felt somewhat low stress before the class, and that went to 41% after. No one felt a low level of stress before taking the course, and that increased to 10%. So it's important to know that that is a positive shift to lower stress levels. So you can see that by providing a positive learning environment, it really opens you up to acquire the knowledge and skill sets that you need to be able to feel financially well and to have a sense of financial well-being. All right, next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, I think I kind of, nope, go back up. I think there should be a slide 12, if you don't mind going to slide 12. All right, well, in that slide, there were some quotes that we pulled out from our participants. And some of the quotes, I'll just share maybe 2 of them with you, is where the class one participant said, the class takes away the ambiguity. It gives you some control, some guidelines to stick to. Another participant said, I no longer feel that financial freedom is for rich people. Average people can achieve this reality with the right relationship with money. And so what I just want to end with is that the data really proves that culturally specific financial education works. It builds skills and confidence in a way that's personal, authentic, and deeply rooted in the many experiences of Black America. And it matters because it has a potential to change the trajectory of our lives, not just for this generation, but for generations to come. And so I just wanted to end with, if you are interested in this program, there's two ways that your organization can get involved. One is I do a train the trainer, where I will license your organizations to offer the course and train your employees to facilitate. And the other is, if you don't have the capacity, we can get certified trainers to you, as long as your organization serves the African-American community. And then I had a slide up with my contact information, but we can get that to you guys later. So that is it for me. I don't take up too much time. And then I will thank you for your time. And I look forward to answering any questions that you may have after. And now I just want to hand it off to Julie Nelmark from Midwest Minnesota CDC.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you for the great presentation you gave on the homebuyer education there. That was quite interesting and helpful for those who need that special attention there. I'll go right into my slides. Thank you. And the next slide. Midwest Minnesota Community Development Corporation, or MMCDC, is based in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, about an hour east of Fargo. And as a rural organization, also with the White Earth Reservation in our original impact area, we have that rural and Native American focus in much of the work we do. We're a membership-based nonprofit, started in 1971, and we do a lot of things, a lot of things as a rural entity. We're a CDFI, we do mission-based lending. We're a NeighborWorks organization, provide housing development and financing. And then we provide some development services, mostly through our native CDFI subsidiary, White Earth Investment Initiative. So free tax preparation focused on the reservation, and then homebuyer education, both on the reservation and off. Next slide, please. So we come at home ownership from three different steps, and the first is homeownership preparation. So we work with the prospective home buyers to help them get prepared to both finance and buy their home, or even locate the right home for themselves, as well as to ensure they'll be able to remain in that home and build over time to build wealth for themselves and their family. So homebuyer education is a general course curriculum is called Home Stretch. And then Pathways Home Curriculum we also offer, and that one is culturally specific for Native Americans. And along with teaching people to understand credit and their own situation, sometimes credit preparation is necessary before they're even ready for homebuyer education. And then finding those financing programs for first-time home buyers, or occasionally some others who are into the credit repair and things like that. Then we work to help the home buyer find what fits their needs, both for themselves and their family. And the training goes through a lot of that work to make sure that they're looking at what they truly need, not what their neighbor needs or has. And then the loan closing process, spending plan, budgeting, things like that are part of it. For the culturally specific training on reservations, many of the homes are or will be built on trust land, meaning that the people can't buy the land and the lender cannot get a standard real estate mortgage on that land. A leasehold improvement mortgage then is is a common way for Native Americans to own or build a home on the reservation. So there's a process to apply for the land site, learn what types of mortgage loans will be available, and then the other aspects involved in there. We work with the Minnesota Homeownership Center for the programs, with the specific homebuyer education programs for some funding and networking and advocacy within the state. And last year, we joined the OESTA HUD network, where about 12 Native CDFIs became certified as HUD homebuyer education providers, which provides access to additional training and funding. So that was very helpful for us. Next slide, please. After the home buyer is prepped and ready to go and has identified their home, our mortgage lending department provides financing. We offer it to our home buyer education clients as well as many others. And we provide mortgage lending throughout Minnesota. And a lot of that is through a referral network that we've built over the last 24 years, primarily community banks throughout the state that are unable to access the secondary market directly. The reason for the secondary market is that provides a lot of access to essentially replenish cash for the lending. So we underwrite the loans, sell the loans to the secondary market, and that then provides both parties to continue that work, financing additional home buyers. We do that with both market rate loans as well as USDA Rural Development Guaranteed loans. That provides access with lower down payments and protects both the lender and offers the home buyers an opportunity for funding that they wouldn't otherwise have access to in many cases. We also provide down payment assistance loans. Some of that is funded through our own funds, through CDFI fund awards. We've worked through Project Reinvest, a grant program from NeighborWorks America, and some other programs, some local county programs. So that helps people get into housing as well. And then next slide, please. We work with, there are some special financing options specific to Native American home buyers. And those include the HUD 184 loans that are specific to Native American home buyers needing home loans on trust land, and the RD 502 loans, those rural development guaranteed loans, will work on trust land and elsewhere, so for Native Americans and others. And there are a few differences between the two, but they're both very attractive loan programs for those who are unable to access standard lending involving the leasehold improvement mortgage that again is difficult for lenders to handle if they don't go through some programs. There's a federal approval requirement through the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs within the Department of Interior, and that then necessitates a tribal agreement to get those federal level departments on board with the lending there. So our next slide then will, I'll just touch on, we do provide housing development, single family and multifamily, mainly focusing within 2 hours of our offices to facilitate the close work that's needed on an ongoing basis for the construction, and then following construction for the property management afterwards for the multifamily housing. So we provide roughly, it's been quite low in the pandemic, but typically 2 to 5 homes per year in about 5 communities in Northwest Minnesota. We use the Building Better Neighborhoods floor plans that Greater Minnesota Housing Fund developed years ago. That provides a somewhat smaller compact house floor plan. It fits on smaller lot sizes to keep the costs down, and it also often includes an unfinished basement that the home buyer can then develop later, finish out later with funds that they can save up over time, or family and friends helping them finish it out. They can grow into the house as their family grows. We're struggling. I saw a question in the Q&A earlier about how to address the rising home prices. We're exploring manufactured housing because there's a huge gap between rental housing and then affordable housing to buy. And this might provide, there are some really attractive manufactured homes these days that we're looking to get into that. We manage our own apartments throughout 15 communities in Northwest Minnesota, as well as for Becker County EDA's housing in their voucher program. So again, we do a lot of things, and we just try to continue helping people get into housing that they can afford and retain them. So last slide gives my contact information, and I will then hand off the reins to Erin Day from Dev Northwest to talk to you next. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Erin Day. I'm the Director of Real Estate for Dev Northwest. Dev Northwest is a community economic development corporation located in Oregon. For those of you guys who are not Oregonians, Dev Northwest has offices all along the I-5 corridor. So everything kind of south of Portland and all the way through Eugene. So that would be Portland, Salem, the capital, Corvallis, and the Eugene area where our offices are. So we have been around for quite a while, since about the 70s. We do a couple different things. One thing that we do is real estate development. So we have a fairly extensive multifamily rental portfolio. We also develop homes for homeownership as well as townhouses. We also do a little bit of commercial and mixed use development as well. And although the majority of our development is affordable, we do a little bit of moderately priced and market rate housing as well. In addition to the real estate work that we do, we also have an access to capital program. So we are a CDFI lender. We do a lot of small business lending. And we're just starting to get started in construction lending as well. We have a fairly extensive financial well-being program. So we offer individual counseling and education. We are able to work with folks with IDAs. We provide down payment assistance. I don't have it listed here, but we also do foreclosure counseling. We do some youth navigation work, so youth homelessness. And more recently, we've been doing some work around wildfire recovery. Also under that financial well-being program, we also have a repair and rehab program. Our last business line is our Thriving Communities program, and this is specific to neighborhood revitalization and legislative advocacy. I'm here today, obviously, to talk about Dev Northwest's affordable homeownership work over the last 5 years or so. So basically, about 5 or so years ago, we started to really take a look at this affordable homeownership gap and say, what is going on here? What's happening in Oregon? How can we do better to decrease this affordable homeownership gap, especially for communities of color? And we kept coming back to these kind of same 3 pillars that we're talking about today, which is the financial education and counseling, the financial tools, the IDAs, the DPA, the mortgage products. And we also took a hard look at the affordable housing supply. And so we said, how can we work together as an organization and interdepartmentally to really make a dent in the homeownership gap? And we decided to prioritize affordable housing developments. As most of you know, this is a major issue. We can educate all day long. We can provide financial tools. But if there's a limited supply, then the impact of these other resources is really limited. So how did we do? So we worked pretty hard over the last couple of years to create a feasible, replicable, accessible, and adaptable development model to try to get more units on the ground, but not only just get more units on the ground, but also make sure that those units were reaching home buyers that needed them most. So it was a hard couple of years, as you all know, but this is how we've done. So over the last 3 years, we've added over 100 homes to our development portfolio and pipeline. We have 18 that were completed and sold since 2020. We have 52 under construction, 34 breaking ground in the next 12 months, and then we have another 50 in due diligence right now, probably expected to close in the next year or two. Our homeownership projects span 8 cities in Oregon. Some of them are in urban, some suburban, some rural communities. We are serving individuals at 80% or below the area median income. And generally speaking, our homes are selling for about $180,000 to $250,000. Our home sizes are about 800 to 1,300 square feet. And we offer a lot of home models, but our largest one is 3-bedroom, 2-bath. So the way that we are doing these projects, we are using a community land trust model, which I know some of you are pretty familiar with, but just for those of you who are not as familiar with the CLT, basically DevNW purchases a parcel of land. We then subdivide that parcel into legal lots, individual legal lots. We fund our capital stack, which I'll talk about in more specifically in just a minute. But once the homes are completed, we sell the homes, but DevNW continues to own the land beneath those homes, as well as all the common area. So in the picture to the right, DevNW would continue to have this entire parcel as part of our real estate portfolio for the long term. The houses sit on a 99-year ground lease that automatically renews every time that deed transfers. And so what that does is it ensures that the home remains affordable in perpetuity. So thinking a little bit about the funding stack, the capital stack, this is definitely the most challenging aspect of trying to get affordable units on the ground. So anytime that you're looking to put together a capital stack, one of the primary considerations for your funding sources is how is that funding source going to be secured or guaranteed in the event of a default. So you want to make sure that whatever funding sources you're layering together for your stack, that, you know, however they're being secured or guaranteed are not going to be in legal conflict with one another. So for a rental project, this is a little bit more straightforward, only because the owner or the developer tends to stay in the project long term. So there's a little bit more leeway on the back end for security. Also, going along with that, with a home ownership project, you have a new player, and that new player in your capital stack is the future mortgage lender, who's going to take a first lien position long term on the finished home. So that's just something that we need to consider. There's also just fewer funding sources available for home ownership that we can kind of mix and match to make these work. So I want to work through a little bit through the different phases of a homeownership development and which pieces need to be funded and how we kind of overcome the security issue. So for site acquisition, we typically use a grant source to do this. We try to minimize the site acquisition costs, but we use a lot of the same funding sources that are available for rentals. So home, CDBG, other local, state, and federal funding sources. And typically the site acquisition costs are paid off when the financing is closed. So before construction starts. So the security of the funder who is assisting with the site acquisition is usually not in conflict with the other members of the other funding sources. Skipping all the way down to the vertical construction for a second. The vertical construction is essentially everything above the house pad. So this is the house itself. And this is also fairly straightforward because there are a lot of really good construction loan products on the market right now. There's both in the public and the private sector. And typically the construction lender will always take a first lien position through the construction process. And so then when those homes are finished and they're sold, the proceeds from that sale will then be used to pay off the vertical construction first, the construction loan first, and then that construction lender is out of it. And that first lien position then goes to the future mortgage lender. The trickiest part of a homeownership development is this middle piece. So this due diligence and pre-development and infrastructure and soft costs, which definitely start to add up when you're talking about possibly having to rezone a site or subdivide a site. And then moving forward into, all the infrastructure costs. So putting in roads and sidewalks and stormwater management and all of those other things. And so this can get pretty costly. So because you're offering the homes at a discounted price, you typically don't have the revenue to pay back the vertical construction and then cover all of these other expenses like a market rate developer could do. And so you need a funding source in here that's substantial enough that they can cover these costs, but also can be secured in a way that doesn't interfere with the site acquisition or the vertical construction. And that can start to, or the future mortgage lender, and that can start to be difficult. So in Oregon, the way that we do this is through a state subsidy. This is something that I just want to throw a caveat. I am oversimplifying all of this, and I definitely don't want to say that this LIFT subsidy is kind of the silver bullet. It's a fairly new program that was started, I think 2019 was the first allocation. It definitely has some kinks to it that we're all still kind of working through, but it does provide an opportunity to make a little bit of progress, and we've been able to use this subsidy to push units out. So overall, the subsidy allows up to $115,000 in that infrastructure and land improvement costs. We cannot use this for vertical construction, partially because the state takes a shared first lien position on the project. They share it with the construction lender, but they do agree to subordinate. So there's a subordination agreement in place so that if and when the homes ever or if the project goes into default during construction, there's some type of risk mitigation there. So that's the key to trying to get that infrastructure covered. Also, this loan product does allow our homeowners to get conventional mortgages on their products, their projects. So that's also a really positive aspect of this model. So I'm just going to kind of wrap up a couple of takeaways that we've experienced over the last couple of years as we've kind of ramped up this development. One, there are a lot of advocacy opportunities at the local, state, and federal level. So if you are in a jurisdiction that doesn't have access to these funds, there's a really good opportunity. I would suggest that you take a look at the LIFT program and see. Definitely not take all of it, but there's definitely it's a good starting off point. But there's definitely a lot that can be done in terms of filling in those infrastructure costs. The second takeaway is I just keep going back. I cannot underscore enough how important those three pillars are. So what our other speakers are talking about financial education, counseling, those tools. We're really lucky at Dev Northwest that we have a robust financial well-being program. And so we have an asset building team that the minute that we decide that we're going to do a development in a certain area, we have bicultural, bilingual staff that go into those communities and start working with culturally specific organizations, homeowners, schools, churches, hospitals, whoever we can, and they actually start developing those relationships, and they carry those future homeowners all the way through the process. So through the screening process, through the approval process, they work with the mortgage lenders, and then they provide that sort of post closing support. So we're really lucky to have that. But if you're an organization that doesn't have that, I can't emphasize the third point as well enough that strong development partnerships are key. These projects are still very nuanced. You're competing on the open market for construction costs, for supply chain issues. You're trying to overcome a lot of challenges. And so it's really important to have strong development partners and to have that kind of laid out before you start. These are not sort of chia pet types developments. These are more like bonsai trees. They take a lot of TLC and really take a village to get through, at least right now. Hopefully, as we start to see more funding sources and opportunities come through, it'll get a little bit easier. But so with that, I am going to pass it off to Rick, and I'm happy to take any questions during the Q&A.
Thanks, Erin, very much. As Erin mentioned, my name is Rick Guzman. I am the Executive Director of the Neighbor Project, which is a NeighborWorks organization. I'm going to be mostly focusing on our homeowner preservation work. Our primary work is based in Aurora, Illinois, the second largest city in Illinois, which is a majority minority community. In the core of the city, it is primarily very old housing stock. So if you go on the assessor's website, you'll see essentially what look like guesses of when housing was actually built. So you'll see entire blocks where just all of the houses will say they're built in 1900, or you'll see entire blocks where it's 1910. There's very rarely anything in between. My own house says 1890. I don't know if that's when it was built or not. I think it's just the best guess. But in any event, most of the housing stock in the core part of our city is well over 100 years old. And so it means that people are dealing with lead pipes, lead paint, more environmental hazards, more maintenance and upkeep. It's one of the sort of, some people call it like a poverty tax, right? There are extra costs to living in a place that has maybe some other, some of the places where people can afford to buy homes. And we are primarily a homeownership organization. Our goal is to try to help people into first-time homeownership, to raise the homeownership rates of our community. But unfortunately, we don't have the luxury of only focusing on helping people to access or attain homeownership, because it is an ongoing task, a full-time job to work with people to maintain homeownership. And we do that in a number of ways, like probably a number of you do. We are part of a county court foreclosure mediation program. We've helped hundreds of families over the past couple of years during the pandemic to access the Homeowner Assistance Fund or rent assistance or different things made available through the CARES Act or ARPA. And so like many of you, we are doing those things, but we're also having to do quite a bit in the area of homeownership preservation to just help people stay in their homes in other ways. A lot of that has to do with maintaining this older housing stock. If you can go to the slide 2 possibly, slide 2 there real quick. And I might jump back to slide 1 there, sorry. But if you'll notice, this is a partnership that we have co-branded. The City of Aurora has offered us CDBG funding for the past many years, about a decade or a little bit more, to operate a program that was originally designed to help people, particularly with safety concerns, to maintain their homes. So those were things like I mentioned, lead pipes, occasionally some lead paint, although that tends to get expensive to remediate. But when we first started, it was only doing kind of 5 primary things. It was helping people to repair, replace their roofs, furnaces, porches, electrical or plumbing issues. When we first started, the max grant that was made available, we're using CDBG funding. And so some of you might understand why I'm going to say this. The max grant was $4,999. And I don't have time to get into the full reason why, but the basic bottom line is that once you cross the $5,000 threshold, and HUD doesn't particularly like that we do this, but there are then things that you have to do to sort of mitigate and do lead testing to make sure you haven't made things worse. And then if you go over a $25,000 threshold, there's actually a requirement to fully mitigate any of the areas that you may be working around. And that gets tough. Also, one of the other things that might sound tough, particularly now in today's cost of construction, is that $5,000 price tag, or just under $5,000 to try to do those things. And so we have adapted and moderated this program over time. I think 10 years ago when we started, for $49.99 was getting a lot of roofs done. We also were working with people originally with a forgivable loan. And what we did to sort of now try to have to make up for the fact that it's almost impossible to do a roof or a furnace or many of these projects for that cost, is we added a component allowing people to also get a $5,000 deferred loan on top of that. So these are 0 interest loans, deferred indefinitely until you sell the house. And that's allowed us to do a little bit more. And if you go back to slide 1, I know you won't be able to read this, it's very small, but we've also added a whole bunch of other repairs that we're able to make, because as we went through again and again, we just found that people were having difficulties with septic, with mold remediation, with radon, with a variety of other repairs and things that happen that they've needed to be able to maintain. So we've been able to increase what's available I'm going to read a quote from the City of Aurora's consolidated plan. It says, since the program inception, the city has helped 226 households remain in their homes. And you notice they said the city, not the neighbor project, even though we did all the work, but we actually like it that way. The city has ownership of this program. They give us credit in other places. And we've worked with them and now the state to also access state trust fund dollars. So we're now able to also help, because over and over we're finding people where $10,000 just wasn't enough to keep them in their homes. And so we now have a program that can go up to $30,000. And we're working with them on that to be able, again, to help them with more, bigger, broader ways of being able to help them stay in their homes, since that's such a big part of the work that we need to focus on here. If you go to the slide 3 now, the one other thing I wanted to just talk about, because there are a lot of different things that we do, but another direct partnership with our city, and it's really benefited us to kind of co-brand, co-launch, co-own programs, is that we're not just doing one-time assistance. You know, a lot of the CARES Act and the ARPA money has really made some of us focus on what is needed, but kind of one-time interventions to help people. But our goal is to help work with people over a much longer period of time to help them to be able to be sustainable, to sustain being in their homes, and to improve their finances. And so we're also offering to our homeowners, I'm just going to very quickly go through. If you go to the next slide, we're working with people on making sure that they are banked. So there's another slide here that talks about the things that we focus on and we're able to help people with. I'm not sure if we're able to go to the next slide. There it is. But helping people, there are a large number of people who are unbanked or underbanked. There are many people who have no credit established at all. There are people who need to build their credits. We're helping them get connected to banking, establish credit. Reducing their non-housing debt by 10%, reducing delinquent accounts, and then of course, trying to help people save at least a week's worth of income or adopt new savings behaviors. If we quickly run through, if we go to the next slide, we'll see that we're in an area that has a lower than average poverty rate, but an above average number of people who are living paycheck to paycheck. We're a majority minority community, as I said, so a lot of these things disproportionately impact certain parts of the community. If you go to the next slide, this next slide just simply shows that we launched during the pandemic and we were able to really increase the number of people that we reached. If you go to the next slide, what we're really most proud of is with just a few financial counselors working with both homeowners and renters, we're able to increase people's net worth by over $2 million. By helping them to reduce their debt by 1.4 million, increase their savings. This is measurable savings when they've actually reached an outcome of over $600,000. And this is a program that only costs about $300,000 a year. If you go to the final slide, you'll see, again, a large number of renters, but a large number of female-headed households. Over 90% of the people we work with are below 80% of the median income, and about 67% are below 60% of the median income. So we're really just sort of trying to focus these programs on meeting people where they're at, but not just providing the one-time solutions that are needed to maintain them in their homes, but also ways of working with them to increase their financial wellness and help them sustain over the longer period of time. So I think we're getting close to being back on schedule. So I'm going to stop there and turn this back over to Kurt.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm going to ask all the panelists to come back so we can go into our Q&A section here. Thank you very much for all the panelists on providing that valuable information. I think a lot of people online will find that very informative. What I did want to ask the panelists is, how does trust play into the participation in your individual programs? And what are your organizations doing to build that trust?
I'll start very quickly by saying trust is everything. It is at the center of everything we do. We need to have, as many of others have mentioned, we have culturally representative staff, a lot of bilingual staff. Our community is at 43%, Latinx, and so that's very important. Our biggest referral source is word of mouth, and it says a lot about hopefully the way that we're treating our customers, but it's also again about how even though the need is far greater than what we're able to supply, when people trust us, that makes all of the difference.
Great. Any of the other panelists like to?
Yeah, I could add just a little bit in terms of when you are offering the financial education, because it's culturally specific and everyone in the course looks like you, whoever is teaching the course looks like you, the information was gathered based upon your culture. There is a trust there because you feel validated and heard, and you don't have to justify anything you're saying, and you're with people with shared experiences, right? So when you have that, you create an environment where folks are willing to open up and talk honestly about whatever their financial situation is and lean on each other. So it really becomes a community type learning. And because you don't have to justify any of your beliefs and you could find commonality, there's a level of trust that opens up where people are just sharing so much about themselves that it becomes an internal process. The learning becomes internal. Because you don't have any fear of judgment or any fear of retaliation, and everything that you do and say is valid. And so trust creates an environment that opens you up to learning.
I'll just add to Jackie's and Rick's comments. I agree with everything they've said. I was going to say, be part of the community and build trust. And many of our staff are not Native American, but we work actively in that community. And it has been a many-year-long process to get to know the people we're working with, to understand their concerns and issues, and to build our programs to address those issues, build those programs with them. So it's either being part of the community or learning how to work with the community.
Anyone else?
I would just add ditto to what everybody else said, but I would also add that just going through the process of buying a home and all of those steps and obstacles, I think trust is really essential to help make sure that you don't lose people, even once they're on board and engaged. You tend to hit hurdles and real challenges, and that scares people, especially if you're working with somebody whose like legal status is in question or has family members whose legal status is in question. This process can be really scary and hard. And so when you introduce language barriers and all sorts of other cultural issues, it's really important to have somebody that you know will help you kind of walk through every step of the way, no matter what happens. We definitely see that on the home buyer process, and even with a lot of support, tend to lose folks along the way just because of those hurdles. So I definitely trust is essential.
Great, thank you for that. I know the importance of NARAB, NARAB, ARIA, and the Gay Alliance helps bridge that gap and helps build that trust. And we look forward to working with all the groups to help build that trust. Another question I have is, how does the relationship between the community demographics, government entities, and or financial institutions impact the goal of homeownership? Anyone like to jump in?
I'll jump in. I can't really speak for anyone else, but I know that we spend a lot of time working with the community. I think I mentioned in my presentation that partnerships are key. We do a lot of education, a lot of just explaining what the homeownership issues are, trying to educate people on what resources and barriers are out there. I think people are aware that there is a lack of affordable housing for homeownership, and they're kind of generally aware of the issues, but we spend a lot of time, and we find that the community is where we are most engaged with political stakeholders or community stakeholders. We are most successful in completing projects and getting folks into homes in those communities. So I would say that it's absolutely, especially for those of you who are working in culturally specific areas, I think making sure that you have a presence in a relationship is a pretty direct indicator of your success in that area.
And much of what we do in terms of the housing development, single family or multifamily, is in response to requests from the communities, in partnership with those communities, at times to decrease the cost of the land itself or the building of the infrastructure costs. Sometimes donations help with that. Sometimes TIF or tax increment financing or tax abatements help to offset those costs. But throughout, it has to be what fits and works for the community and what they need there. We're not imposing what we think they need. We need to work with them to address the needs that they identify and have.
For this program, so I'm no longer with a nonprofit, but I'll tell you what we did at PHC. Because this course is going for the African American community, a lot of banks still need that CRA credit, right? They're still trying to reach out. So what the possibility for shops who are taking on this course is you can go to your funder, your financial institution, and ask for funding to support this program. So that you can go ahead and outreach, and there's different ways to partner with organizations to do that. So once you can understand what the benefit is to that organization, you can present it in that way. And I know for banks, they're concerned about opening accounts, they're concerned about increasing deposits, and they're concerned about hitting their CRA numbers and supporting programs. And this is an ideal program to do that. And you can also partner with them to bring them into as speakers. So you really have to look at how do you market this to benefit the community, because there's organizations who need to serve that community. And this allows you an entree into partnership and funding opportunities. So you have to be really strategic.
Great. What is the success rate of sustainable home ownership in these programs? And a second part, what strategies are employed after the home is purchased to make sure that the buyer can sustain the home?
Okay, I'll go first. So the success rate, if I'm just, and just bear with me, when we're looking at just PHC's numbers, I believe that when we looked at it, about 34% of the people who took the class went on to homeownership. But you also have to understand, you're in a homeownership organization, right? So that was their path anyway. So did this course, it may have shortened the length of time, given them the opportunity to really be more affordable and sustainable post home ownership. Because once you could grasp your finances, because what got you to think about home ownership is not what's going to keep you there. So the ability to be financially strong and sound and understand that the sustainability part is what we're looking at. So there are going to be increases in home ownership for the clients who are taking this class, but the real measurement from each of the shops that are doing it is how sustainable that is. And that's going to take more time to really give those numbers in comparison. But when we did an initial comparison, the numbers increased noticeably to homeownership once the client took the class, as opposed to clients who did not take a culturally specific class.
Okay. Anyone else? I'll go to the next question. How do funding sources play into the success of your individual programs? And what challenges exist around funding projects and or programs for you?
Do you have all day? Part of the skill of our grant writer is in identifying the funding sources that fit the work and the communities in which we're working, and matching those up as much as possible, so we're not wasting our time seeking ones that won't work. But there are a few partner organizations that we go to often. Northwest Area Foundation works in Minnesota and then west to the coast, I believe. And they have a strong focus on Native American communities. And so we're able to partner with them on multiple levels to help address housing and many other needs. And so those are some of those types of partnerships are sometimes the most lucrative. NeighborWorks America is another one of those very strong partners that helps us with in a number of ways. So can't go into all the details, but those are the best ways that work for us.
Let me just quickly piggyback on that. As a fellow NeighborWorks organization director, I think NeighborWorks, it's our most valuable partner because while we do a lot of reporting to them, they put very few strings attached to the funding. And it is oftentimes the first funding into a program, or it can be the last funding to get something across the finish line. So it's NeighborWorks Week. We should give them their props. They do very well with funding. And they do a good job. We do a lot of reporting, as I mentioned, with really leveraging that funding and helping us to leverage it. I wish I could say exactly the same. You know, again, if we had all day, we'd talk about HUD funding and some of the other things that have a lot more strings attached to them. I talked about that. Sometimes the purpose of the funds is right on, but we have a full-time person running this program just to do the reporting, the environmental reports, all the things that are required. It's worth it, but there are oftentimes, you know, a lot of work, a lot of investment that you have to put into utilizing the funds that are designed to meet these needs.
Okay. We're getting some questions from the audience, and we're almost near the end of our time here. But someone wrote, the number of ways to buy a house is multiplying with cash, down payment assistance, equity sharing, rent to own, and even extending to 40-year mortgages. What are some of the ways that your groups can partner with for-profit businesses to solve the pathway to home ownership? Did I stump you guys? I know that's kind of a big question that you might not have considered, but what do you think of some of the other kind of equity sharing and rent-to-own programs, and whether or not those are viable programs?
I can answer for Dev Northwest. So we have explored some of those options, and when they pop up or we get a buyer who is interested in doing that, we try to help in any way that we can. We do have several properties in our portfolio that are currently in a rent to own situation. They're not CLTs, but they're through a different program that we have. So we do try to do that. I think it's mostly on a case-by-case basis, at least for us. We haven't officially partnered with anybody to pursue those specific pathways, but we have worked with probably maybe 30 or 40 different homeowners over the last maybe 5 to 10 years to try to achieve homeownership through those alternative methods.
I will add to that that it is very much a case-by-case basis. And there are a lot of times state programs that we can use to reduce the housing costs in those communities that are overinflated. I see Mrs. Brown's request to address the Santa Barbara County costs, and I'm not familiar with that area, so I can't address that. But I suspect that Community Land Trust might be a possible solution given the high land cost there. And so the shared equity housing is something that I would recommend she explore, because that can cover several different methods. The co-op housing, community land trust, and a few others are often included in that umbrella.
Julia, thank you for trying to address her question, because I know that she had asked it a couple times. So we're at the 3:29 mark Eastern Standard Time, and at this time the question and answer session is over, and I've turned it over to David Dworkin for closing remarks. David.
Thank you so much. That was a fascinating conversation, and I really appreciate everybody, Marietta and Kurt and all of our panelists, all of you for joining us. finally, I just want to say, I hope I'll see many of you at our gala next week. And I want to make sure to thank all of our staff, but particularly Brittany Webb and Henry Weiss, who really did so much great work during this webinar to keep everything flowing so well. And I really appreciate that. And have a great rest of your day.